Pasha Malla won the 2009 Trillium Book Award for her book, The Withdrawal Method, published by House of Anansi Press. His book. Anywho, excuse me, published by House of Anansi Press. Please welcome Pasha Malla.
Hi. Okay, so I'm going to read something that I wrote in the last 3 or 4 days. I finished a book about a month ago that is really long and has about, I think, 36 main characters and an equivalent number of storylines. And my editor, Jared Bland at Anansi, asked me if I was going to write another book. And I said, yes, I'm going to write a book right away about one character doing one thing. So I started this book about a woman who falls down a well. And I'm just going to read the first 6 pages. And there's no title yet. If anyone has any ideas, talk to me after. Okay. I'm really nervous because I just started this. Okay. Clarice fell down a well. She was sad because of this. No, that came later. Falling, she wasn't sad. What was she? Sad. No. Angry or frightened. Happy. Jealous of everyone not falling down this well or any well anywhere. It was a slow fall. She felt stupid falling down a well. It was something that children did. A child fell down a well and became a cause célèbre. An adult fell down a well and was mocked for being stupid and childish or attention-seeking. But Clarice had not been seeking attention by falling down the well or seeking attention now. And besides, there was no one watching the fall. And when anyone fell down a well, child or adult, it wasn't the fall that garnered attention, though arguably for the one falling, this constituted the most thrilling part. The light, airy tumble through the dark, the rush of wind, the flailing limbs, nor even the landing, with its gruesome splintering of bones and rending of tissue and whatever else, grunts, snaps, vomit, etc., or else a soft, miraculous, unscathed thump to the ground. But rather, media and popular attentions were most enthralled with what happened after the landing, viz., the person trapped at the bottom of the well, the ensuing drama, the plaintive cries for help, and the invariable rescue, wherein the rescued person was disinterred and arrived blinking and grateful into the daylight. How this began invariably involved some burly farmer strolling along smoking a pipe, whose dog went up to the edge of the well, sniffing, and then barked, ears suddenly alert and urgent, and the farmer rushed up saying, "What have you got there, boy?" And then came the cries, far away and somehow tragic, "Help, help, I've fallen down a well." This well. I should edit that. And the farmer looked down, squinting into the blackness as though not quite believing this voice belonged to a human being, or specifically a child, who then charmed the nation cherubically. But that was what happened with children, with adults who knew. Clarice anticipated scorn. People were so cynical these days. She's just trying to get famous, someone might say, someone catty and canny and shrewdly mean. Clearly she wanted to fall down a well, this person would say, or blog. Let her stay down there, they'd add, and then conclude, the bitch. Chapter 2. But why had she fallen, and how? Clarice couldn't recall. She left her house that day for some reason. It had been raining. She'd ended up in a meadow somehow. What were the preceding events? A streetcar driver had reduced Clarice to something maudlin, banished from the streetcar into a thin, silty rain. A rain of tears, she thought, falling down the well, with a wry chuckle. Her transfer had been torn. Out of her pocket she'd produced it, and mounting the streetcar's steps behind Out of her pocket, she produced it, mounting the streetcar's steps behind a tall man shaking out his umbrella, and found the transfer soggy and torn, and hid it in her fist, and swept with a breezy nonchalance by the streetcar driver perched in his little booth. And though he called out, "Miss?" she kept going. Panic fizzed from her hands up to her face, and the driver spoke into the intercom. "The lady in the blue shirt? I need to see your transfer." So Clarice had slunk back to the front of the streetcar and unfurled her fingers, and there it was in her palm, mashed to a wet pulp, ink bleeding. Not a transfer anymore. It could have been anything, a tissue, a soaked and ruined corner of some report. And so she'd be banished back down the steps while all the other passengers quietly watched. Only when the streetcar pulled away, sparking sparks, a flash, and a sizzle of sparks high above, did Clarice wonder how the driver hadn't appreciated that it was raining, that the transfers were made of paper thinner than newsprint, like toilet paper of a single measly ply. Surely hers wasn't the only transfer that had ever torn under such conditions. And she thought how the drivers in their maroon uniforms likely only ever rode for free. Their uniforms were their transfers. "Hey, bro," a driver might say to another driver mounting the steps, and nod in an almost conspiratorial way at the maroon uniform. And onto the streetcar this driver, now passenger, would climb and ride, home maybe, all the way home, for free, with no ticket or token or transfer ever trading hands. Yes, Clarice had seen this. They sat up front near the driver and muttered secretively about transit. So how would he, the driver, or any driver, know about the plight of a commuter with a wet transfer, know how powerless a human being was against the forces of nature? He wouldn't. But surely this could have been covered in training. Yes, a session, thought Clarice, falling down the well, retreating into the little glass enclosure that was known as a shelter out of the rain, though even here the rain seeped in and stained the concrete a darker gray, and she wondered if the concrete leached liquid as the earth did, spreading it about, if concrete, though hard and impenetrable seeming, was somehow also porous, or if in fact the rain was thin enough that it drifted into the shelter in a mist and settled, if the wetness had come from above or below. Clarice had not wondered then in the shelter, but wondered now, falling, hours or was it years later, down a well. But of this training session, she imagined a classroom like any other, rows of desks, and in each an aspiring streetcar driver in his or her maroon uniform, or perhaps they were only given uniforms upon graduation, like the green jacketing of a victorious golfer, so she shifted the camera of her mind's eye to the teacher who would be wearing a suit. Interesting, she thought, falling down the well, that he would not be in uniform, but no, he would be some make of professor, hence the suit with elbow patches, naturally, a professor of ethics. Because if doctors, lawyers, and whoever else should study ethics, why not the drivers of the city streetcars, who surely required things like compassion, or at least some sort of code to guide their piloting of and constant interactions with the city's citizens? And in this class on ethics, a lesson on transfers. Sometimes it will rain, the professor lectured, and a transfer will become wet and ruined, and there is nothing anyone can do about this. So be kind, be understanding, let the people on, do not banish them back into the rain. And Clarice loved this professor a little bit for this. How sad that he wasn't a streetcar driver, this kind and compassionate man, but instead stuck in his little brown office surrounded by books by great thinkers like Plato and Ignatieff, towering shelves of books. I'll keep that. Towering shelves of books and stacks of books on the floor and his desk and on the settee in the corner with a band of sunlight through the window twirling dust, the light golden. It was autumn, and the poor chap only ever extricated from his office to lecture aspiring streetcar drivers on the finer points of caring. And perhaps the course culminated in a multiple-choice test, and might he have to mark it on a bell curve, thought Clarice, falling down the well, because so few of the streetcar drivers gave two shits, or even one shit, about the ethical component of their work, only about driving, about making sparks, about the clack of the rails and the streetcar swinging around a corner like a big old boat, about control and power. But what if the Transit Commission, once a year, awarded an afternoon of driving to their best professor, as voted not by the streetcar drivers, who were senseless and cruel and selfish, and whose eyes were only on the prize of driving a streetcar, but by the other professors, who were all similarly kind and caring, or at least sensible, or at least professional and attuned to the skills of their colleagues, as in they knew a good teacher when they saw one, or heard one discussing pedagogical methods in the staff lounge. And so maybe, one day, Clarice would be waiting for streetcar, and here it would come, and she'd step up to it, and the doors would open, and sitting there would be this professor, still in his suit with the elbow patches, was how she'd know. With a big smile, he'd welcome her aboard, and even when she shamefully showed him her desiccated transfer, he would whisper, "It's okay, I understand, it's raining, these things happen," and then raising his voice bellow, "Welcome aboard," and perhaps even ring the bell as the streetcar went sliding off into traffic. Chapter 3. But what had she left? A marriage, a man, Rob, also a job. Clarice's work was in stained glass, specifically windows, more specifically mosaics assembled from colored panes, wedges, and slices. In her garage was a workspace where she prepared each vitimus and grossed and painted the glass, and a kiln, and a wall of tools, and a big cabinet of neatly labeled samples from which she composed each piece, and books of inspirational designs from the cathedrals of Europe, the parlors of Hollywood mansions, the reading rooms of Ivy League libraries. Long before they were married, the first time Rob came over, Clarice led him shyly into the garage to show him her work. At that time, Clarice had been fashioning a panel featuring shepherds and lambs for a local Sunday school's chapel. "Wow," said Rob, "you're really talented." "Thanks," said Clarice, looking at the panel, trying to see it as Rob might see it, which was not as a puzzle that still needed solving, but something beautiful. But she noticed Rob's eyes were pointed not at the panel, but at her. "Not your thing?" she asked him. "Oh, no," said Rob, "it's great." He paused. "I guess I just prefer windows you can look through," he said. "I like seeing what's on the other side." Clarice's spirits sank a little at this. She thought to instruct Rob about beauty and tradition, the vitrinous craft, her flirtation with light, the transcendent spirit, but he was fixing her with a lingering look and seemed to be wavering slightly, as though buffeted by some internal wind. And then he was leaning in to kiss her. They pressed lips for a 2 count, and Rob pulled away with an expression of triumph, and a glitter of something joyful went twinkling through Clarice's heart, and she forgot about the shepherds and lambs entirely, and she took Rob by the hand and led him back inside. Rob worked as a crossing guard. In this endeavor, he wore a fluorescent vest and blew entertaining patterns, shaven a haircut, e.g., on his whistle as he led children back and forth across a fitfully trafficked intersection. When they first began dating, Clarice liked to watch him do this from afar, and sometimes the children cheered one of Rob's whistled tunes, and Clarice's heart swelled, and she felt a love for Rob so desperate it made her almost afraid. Yet in fundamental ways they differed. Clarice was a romantic. Rob was a pragmatist who believed resolutely in the principles of science. He especially enjoyed nature documentaries. After they married, Clarice learned her own way of enjoying these programs too, and often she joined him on the couch to watch them on TV. For example, a show about sea life, in which a segment featured some sort of tubular phosphorescent creature affixed to the ocean floor. It wavered slightly, as though dancing, or not quite dancing, but more moved by a private song and longing to tear free of its roots and dance. The creature seemed to Clarice somehow shy. It ate by inhaling microscopic plankton as they floated past, and procreated independent of a mate within its own body, and then it died in labor. Like a green shoot sprouting from the stump of a burned-down tree, progeny emerged from its corpse. "See," said Rob, with a note of vindication in his voice, "this is what life is. You're born, you exist to reproduce, and then you die. And so it is for your offspring, and theirs, forever, until extinction." "But," said Clarice, "when it was alive, it danced. It was beautiful." "Maybe," said Rob, "though really everything anything does is ultimately just to further its species. And was it really dancing? Was it only trying to entice food?" "Well, I thought it was beautiful," said Clarice, "and a little sad." And Rob smiled and said, "That's your biological imperative." Clarice wanted to know what this meant. "Okay," said Rob, pinching the bridge of his nose, eyes scrunched. "As a female of the species, you are meant to be soft. Sentiment is a way of softening you, making you vulnerable, making you need a man's strength and security to bring you together to make babies, to further the species." Rob seemed pleased with himself, a picture of strength and security in his orange crossing guard's vest. "But," said Clarice, "we have beauty for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with making babies." "Like your stained glass?" said Rob, and before Clarice could reply he added, "Which, have you thought? Maybe you make only to attract a mate." He gestured at the television where a male octopus courted a female with a theatrical flailing of limbs. Any aesthetic endeavor, this is all it is, a peacock spreading its tail feathers. You do or make something beautiful so someone will notice you and want to procreate with you. I'll say it again, the only purpose of anything is to further existence. That's the biological imperative. That's what guides everything we do. Clarice thought about this, watching the octopi. The female acquiesced, and the male mounted her crudely. And she thought about the songs Rob blew on his whistle for the children. They weren't necessary, and hopefully not attempts to seduce a child. No, they were artistic flourishes, purposeless other than to inspire joy. "Doesn't beauty give us a reason for living?" said Clarice. "Sure, with the ultimate reason for living just to make another thing live," said Rob, as the male octopus plunged its proboscis into the female's breathing hole, and he pulled Clarice into his arms and petted her hair and said, "But what do I know, though, right? Thanks."